It is Friday. It's another edition of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted. And it's our first edition with Donald Trump now as the 47th president of the United States. And so there's a lot to talk about, but as always, we're going to make it consolidated. How's my colleague and managing partner, Jeremy, doing?
I'm ready to start the next season, the next cycle of analysis, polling, and our podcast.
So let me kick it off. All right. There's a lot going on in my head because there's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. and the border in California. But basically, so this is the fifth day of the Trump presidency. And what I can say is that he is making good on as many, if not all, of his campaign promises in the first couple of days already. He has dealt with immigration, he's dealt with student loans, he's dealt with January 6th, he's dealt with the environment and the Paris Accords, he's dealt with tariffs and trade. He's managed to insult a few world leaders, notably, let's start with Mexico and Panama, just to name just a couple. And he is certainly giving the impression of the guy who gets things done. I made promises. I'm going to fulfill them. I'm going to fulfill them as I said I was going to do in the first day or first couple of days, whatever is feasible. That's one thing and one way to look at it. And those fulfillments are directly to his base. In fact, one could argue that he's even gone beyond appealing to his base and may have some problems with some Republicans. Remember, he's got a very slim majority in the House of Representatives. I think the trouble with what he's doing is simple, and that is that this is not governance. This is shtick, and it feels good. And yes, he's fulfilling promises, but we've learned from Barack Obama and Joe Biden that ruling by executive order or by fiat is not legislating and is not a way to reach across the aisle, which presidents have to do. You know, you can't make law either signing a pen or saying, I got one more vote than everybody else, and so I got a majority, and it's all from my party. There has to be legislating and giving and taking. There has to be some bipartisan support to give the appearance of legitimacy or to make these executive orders long lasting. So what we're probably going to see is what we've seen in the past two administrations: executive orders that are then challenged in court, that are then overturned in court or put on hold for a long period of time, and then ultimately the next election there's a 180-degree turn. And that's not legislating, and that's not governance. Now, I have more to say, but I think what the president is doing, at least as far as this first phase is concerned, is some feel-good stuff for his base. And very soon, he is going to find himself in a situation where the honeymoon is over, perhaps sooner rather than later. And I'll pick up on that when you're done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm in complete agreement regarding governance, fiat, executive order and fiat versus the legislative process. But I think in all of that you said, I did hear a recognition that at the very least, with the previous two administrations, the expectation is that's what you're going to do in the first 30 to 100 days when you take the White House after a win, and you reach out to your base, and you want to get some things done quickly. Unfortunately, that is the trend in the modern era of the imperial presidency, and the presidency, the White House having more and more power through executive action, and we've seen that building up over the past several decades. And each president who wins going forward in the future will have more of that temptation, and there will be more precedent for that. And so that's another conversation as to whether that reverses. But I think, to give Donald Trump the benefit of the doubt, that is the first 100 days. That is the first 30 to 100 days to get some things done, to make do on your promises, especially promises that were large enough. I mean, these were promises that really dealt with security. Most Americans were very concerned about the border, and not from a racist standpoint, from a standpoint of crime and safety, and just from national sovereignty in general, having a border and having something that was policed, infrastructure policed at the border. But what I would pivot to, and I don't want to transition too much, but I think, and this was with Donald Trump going back to 2016. This is kind of the wave of politics around the globe. If we're to look at what is the current environment of politics, elections, and campaigns in not just the Western world, but a great deal of the Western world, of the rest of the world, it is populism versus the establishment. And what we saw on display, a major kickoff to Donald Trump's presidency, was speaking before Davos. I think either he spoke yesterday or he's speaking today. He did speak yesterday. He may also be speaking today. But there was also Javier Milei, the leader of Argentina. And what we see here is this hardening viewpoint of those ideas in politics that were associated with left or liberal, which flowed from think tanks like Davos and the World Economic Forum, versus those that are more nationalist, put that nation first, put Argentina first, put America first, and really sticking it to what has been become known as the globalist ideology. And so, look, Trump ran on that in 2016. That is his brand. I would say he took that to the next level in this previous election, and I think when we put it all together, what we see is he wants to get ahead while there's still time before. I mean, look, we already saw with the new year a terrorist attack, and now a wildfire that's ravaging Southern California. It looks like events could spiral out of control. Now is the time to get things done, to satisfy your base before there is a whole new issue on our plate, whether that is another pandemic, whether that is the next phase of geopolitical tensions, or a cratering global economy. And that's how I'm trying to understand a lot of what is unfolding very quickly.
I get it. And that makes a lot of sense. And I'll add to your comments by saying that what's among those many things that are different from, the first 100 days in January 17, is that the president, despite wisecracks, and there have been many, and insults, and there have been several, he has modulated his voice. He's not in every utterance. He is not speaking to tens of thousands. He's speaking to a handful of reporters, and he is not revving up the crowd. I'll give him that. On the other hand, while technically what you say is good, it's good for him to establish his turf and solidify his base. What I think is probably troubling for him is that what is he doing to consolidate that very tiny Republican majority that he has, particularly in the House? Because he's going to need to keep that majority, and it's very tenuous. We've already seen that already, just in the election, re-election, I should say, of Mike Johnson as Speaker. In other words, um, the next big move that will require legislation and not fiat is DOGE, or DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. And we've talked before, you and I can easily take butcher's knives and go to the carcass of the federal government and just start cutting and slashing and removing and taking away waste and so on. What's required is finesse and politics. And what's required is the understanding that every dollar cut, every agency eliminated, every job eliminated involves a congressional district. And a congressional district, which in the short term, anyway, is losing jobs, losing funding, is in the middle of a building program or a promise to the local arts council for funding, and the local arts council can't exist anymore without the funding. And this includes Republicans. And this is a bipartisan concept. So it's not an insult, but it's the truth, that carcass is like a trough. And there are Democratic pigs at that trough, and there are Republican pigs and independent pigs at that trough. And if you start reducing the amount of goodies in that trough, then you're looking at losing support. That's one problem with the Department of Governmental Efficiency. Remember, that's been tried before. I mentioned it in this podcast. The Gore Commission is actually the Grace Commission under Al Gore as vice president, and then the Erskine Bowles Alan Simpson Commission under Obama, which went nowhere. When you're talking about federal government, you're talking about something that is much more, than esoteric, and that doesn't. And my final point here, that doesn't even get into this relationship between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. I mean, this podcast, we should start a lottery as to when that explodes. You've got two very volatile guys who I don't think particularly care for each other. And how much time do you give them before they start taking shots at each other? Okay, I just said a lot. You got a lot to say.
No, it's, I mean, I'm listening to you, and the more I realize, remember, of course, you know this, but it's easy to get lost in this. This is Donald Trump's last term, right? Mm-hmm. So if I were to put myself in the shoes of somebody who was previously president, who was fairly competitive in the next election, but lost, but then won pretty handedly the third time around, and is now term limited. This is this is where you start thinking about your biography and your legacy, and every day, every week is viewed as what can I put up on the scoreboard? I can and I have to do it. And there was a pretty sizable amount of disappointment after Trump ran in 2016 on such grandiose promises of draining the swamp and doing exactly a 180 on that. And so, and now is the time. This isn't defending. This is understanding. This is my trying to understand what's going on. So I think this would be the environment for bold action, because he's term limited and because he probably more than anything wants his legacy to be remembered for being able to accomplish some very bold and dare I say revolutionary things. You know, the way he campaigned in 2016 was revolutionary. I can't think of another presidency that called out the elite and called out the establishment more than he did. Maybe Andrew Jackson was the last, right? And so maybe Trump wants to go down in history being on a $500 or $1,000 bill. God forbid $1 million bill, if you know what I mean. So that's one piece of it. And then the final thing, or what I'll conclude on, is when we talk about cutting and slashing government, from an economic standpoint, we have to remember that if you slash a department, yes, in the immediacy, you are cutting the jobs of bureaucrats who work at that department, and that does roll over to contractors who contract with that agency or department. But as an economic fact, that money doesn't disappear and dissipate. It's not like you cut a department, let's say that's has a budget of $500 billion. That doesn't mean that $500 billion just evaporates into the air and doesn't go anywhere. That money can then be shifted elsewhere. And so while a class of people may miss out on that money has the potential to be transferred elsewhere. And one could argue to the state level or to the local level, because that money is in existence. It does have to go somewhere. It doesn't just evaporate. So while the bureaucrats of that agency may miss out, and you may lose support, you can gain support elsewhere.
Well said. But the Zogby law of taxes is that don't look for your taxes to go down, even if there's $1 trillion in cuts in the federal budget, because that money does not evaporate. That money gets spent and somebody's got to pay for it, whether they're taxpayers or consumers. And that's the zero sum part of all of this. And that's a whole other issue, isn't it? But wow, what an eventful 5 days we've had already. More to come next week. Anything
Yes.
to add?
No, I think it's full speed ahead. I think this is going to be a very eventful year, and on many fronts. And so there's going to be no shortage of analysis. We'll have a lot of these.
And I will only add to the mix, we didn't really develop it, and that is all of this is taking place at a time when the Democrats are really in disarray. Not only organizationally, but also in terms of finding a message to communicate that matters to people. And what I'm hearing in the walls of the Democratic National Committee and in these very annoying texts that I'm getting, we need money to fight. We need money to fight. We need money to fight. My God, they spent $2 billion in 2024. I don't think they need money. I think they need a message that matters to people.
Boy,
They
yeah.
don't have it. They do not have it.
I actually thought this is what we were going to talk about, because I saw a slew of articles this morning about who are they, who they represent, and what's their future. And, I read passages from Senator Durbin, Senator Sanders. Maybe you read some of the same thing, but yes, they don't need money. They need a vision. I mean, they just don't have a vision. And I actually thought one thing we would talk about was what went wrong and what they could do, but we could either save that for another time.
We'll be back.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, have a good week.
Yeah, you too.
I'll talk to you in minutes. Bye-bye.